All right. Hello again, everybody. So we have discussed the role of technology on these big issues we're tackling today at DISH at South by Southwest from a number of angles, including how food is produced, how food is delivered, and in this session, we're going to look at technology around food itself, the product, and ask what relevance that has to the future of food. I'm really thrilled to be joined by three panelists to discuss this issue. I'll have them join me on the stage. Let me set this down first. All right, so I'm thrilled to be joined by Valeti. He's the CEO and founder of the cultivated meat company Upside Foods, which you'll learn about in a little bit. We also have Fengru. She's the co-founder and CEO of TurtleTree, which is a biotech company looking to reinvent milk, so more on that to come. And Kevin Mugenya, who's a food security and resilience specialist at Mercy Corps. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you all so much for joining us. So before we dive into why science and technology in this space around the food product itself is so critical, I do want to understand a little bit more about what you're doing on this issue, how your companies work, and then also what Mercy Corps is doing and how you're interacting with the private sector around this space. So we'll start with you, Uma. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's an increasingly crowded space, cultivated meat? You're a real pioneer in this space. What exactly are you doing, and why do you think that this work is so critical to the future of food?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, for having me here. Delighted to be here, and probably the most excited when you introduced me as a crowded space of cultivated meat. And
it's getting there.
if you had said that in 2015 when we started this industry, I would have been jumping
alone.
for joy because we felt really alone. And in a matter of 6 years, cultivated meat has become one of the most anticipated and most desired industry that's growing very rapidly. So let me tell you what it is. So Upside Foods is a cultivated meat, poultry, and seafood company. We are based in Berkeley, California. And the idea here is meat is fundamental to civilization. It's the most delicious product across all cultures. It occupies the center of plate. And the demand for meat has continued to increase and does not look like it's going to slow down. So we love the product, but generally, we do not love the process of how it comes to the table. And therefore, the idea behind cultivated meat, which is a new category, is we as humans would love to continue to eat meat for many generations, real meat from animal cells. What if you could grow real meat from animal cells, directly from the animal cell itself, but not have to raise the animal? And that's the idea. So once we started looking at this, it became very clear that you could take the best quality cells from a cow, a pig, a chicken, or an egg, and identify cells that grow inside an animal, and find the ones that have the best nutritional features, find the best textures, flavors, and grow them outside the animal, but provide the same ingredients that any cell needs to eat. Proteins, vitamins, carbohydrates, oxygen, and you get meat, but you cultivate that in 2 to 3 weeks versus taking 2 years for growing a full cow and slaughtering it. And therefore, it has incredible advantages as it scales into a big industry, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much. Now, a natural question for me, which we're going to have to return to because I want to hear from other panelists. I assume that some of our audience here in person or online, if you work in a low-income context, you might think, well, that's great, but what does that mean for the markets I serve? That's going to be a long way off. So I want to get to that. I want to ask you that question, but in a little bit. Fengru, I mentioned how you're working to reinvent milk. Tell us a little bit more about that and a little more on how the technology actually works.
Sure. So here at TurtleTree, we are a biotech company based out of Singapore, Boston, and California. And we're able to make milk and milk ingredients without the animal, just like Upside Meats, but our technology is a little bit different. We're using this technology called precision fermentation, where we're able to get microbes. So microbes are like little biofactories. They could be yeast or fungi. And we get them to ingest sugar and pump out animal protein, just like how an animal would, but without having to go through the animal. Our first target protein that we're launching commercially this year is called lactoferrin. So lactoferrin has a lot of gut benefits, immunity benefits. It has iron regulation benefits. and we plan to work on a B2B2C model. And price point's a big thing. Price point's a big thing to us. And if we're looking at the market today, if we're looking at, say, a whey product or a casein product, whey trades on the market at $1 to $3 per kg. So to get to that kind of price points, it would be very difficult for technology to do that. So for us, lactoferrin is a very high value ingredient. It trades on the market at $1,000 per kg. So we're able to get the price points a lot faster than other ingredient companies. And one might say, oh, how can we make it affordable to growing economies? I think for ingredients like lactoferrin, the functional benefits kick in at very low dosages. So every serving is a much lower price.
So, yeah, similar question for you in terms of looking at these markets. One thing I want to return to is I know both of you are raising capital. That's part of what you do. In addition to developing the technology, you raise capital. And I'd love to dig into how do you make the pitch that this can be profitable while also having an eye toward those impacts. But we'll get to that. Kevin, how does Mercy Corps come at this? I know a big part of your work is with the private sector. And on this topic of science for sustenance, the science and technology behind the food itself, how do those conversations happen within Mercy Corps? Oh, no, we still can't hear you. We'll work on maybe getting your own mic while we...
Hello?
Thank you.
This is much more better. So I know you're wondering what Mercy Corps is doing after a very intelligent conversation around the science of milk and meat. The pockets where we work or the population that we partner with are mainly the food and nutrition insecure populations. Yeah. Now we have a 10-year strategy on pathways to possibilities, and one of the pillars is really looking at food and nutrition security outcomes. And in the current context of the global food crisis, we are seeing an increasing number of population that are increasingly becoming food insecure, heavily relying on markets, not just production. So where does Mercy Corps come in is in the implementation of our pathways to possibilities. Doing it by ourselves or in partnership or through funding by USAID or other partners is fundamentally not going to work. So how do we begin to partner or continue to partner with private sector, research institutions, private sector that are looking at agri-tech, fintech, and of course with government, not forgetting the need to co-create those solutions with the communities. So we don't look at the communities we are working with as beneficiaries. They are equal partners that need to sit at the table of, are they able to really engage with the products that private sectors are using? So that's where we come in this conversation, and we have lots of experience in private sector partnership through what we do advance as market systems approaches, where we partner with private sector. And our overall aim is really looking at how do we build inclusive and resilience communities in this sense.
Now, specifically when it comes to companies that are looking at the food product itself, like cultivated meat or like reinventing milk, is Mercy Corps partnering with companies along those lines, or what does that look like?
Not necessarily. That's not how we approach it. So basically, when we are looking at the areas where we are working, let's say in Asia, Middle East, or Africa, in pockets where they are food insecure, we're definitely looking at what do community do at the moment. So whether they are doing corn, whether they're doing livestock production, and in the Horn of Africa, where I'm based in Nairobi, we are looking at communities that have lost over 7 million livestock over the last 5 failed rainy seasons. That conversation on whether they're able to produce meat or whatever we are discussing, it's not a conversation you want to introduce now. Because that level of conversation, you have to put it in the context of social, cultural dynamics, economic development, what the countries can and cannot allow, and the role of private sector in partnership with the government. So we don't necessarily come with a solution. Yeah. We tend to co-create those solutions with the community.
That's why I actually think it's fantastic to have the Mercy Corps perspective here together with innovators working on private sector solutions, because there's a disconnect often, right, between kind of the Silicon Valley ideas for the future of food and the realities on the ground of a lot of donors and NGOs in these markets. So can you speak to, and then I want to hear from the two of you on this, what do you see as the opportunity for collaboration here? And let me just note one thing that came up in a conversation we had. If these things work and scale, it will free up land. And if land is freed up, that could introduce opportunities, and Mercy Corps should very much be engaged in that conversation. Can you speak to that a little bit? Is that something you're looking at?
That's an interesting perspective, the way you frame it. But how I'd look at how Mexico is coming at the conversation is in some of the spaces where we're working with Mexico AgriFin program is really partnering with some of the scientific-based organizations like CJARs. One of the things they do have is a technical think tank on some of the things they're able to really produce, whether these are seeds, improving on the livestock production systems, and really how does that information translate or get into the farmer? What we've found as a nexus or as an opportunity for us to add value is that bridge between connecting scientists and frontline farmers, smallholder farmers. So that can be through agri-tech combined with bundled services like financial access services, insurance and all that. But we try and step down. We have actually a platform called the Sprout platform that steps down very high-level scientific information into a platform that a farmer is able to access by themselves. And then we are able to really connect with other service providers. This can be either financial service providers, insurance, or extension services. The only thing is that there are limitations to this as well, depending on which part of the world you are. So agri-tech is a platform which we are using to really connect farmers with scientists. The only piece that I feel from my perspective is always missing is a feedback loop where the farmers are able to give the scientists the feedback that this is not applicable in our context. That sort of conversation is still not being held at the right level. I feel it's very disseminating research. That's not helpful in advancing the conversation.
I want to get to that point of feedback. I see both of you are nodding, though. So before I pose a question, you want to just react to that?
I think there's a disconnect, and I think the disconnect is really important to highlight right now because, yes, we are in the Silicon Valley. Yes, we are talking about a paradigm change. It's not going to impact Kevin's work for a while. It may take a decade or 2 decades, Kevin, before the work we're doing actually impacts what you're doing on the ground. But if we don't start this work right now, 20 years from now, all of us will be here talking about the same thing, right? So the idea here is we need to kind of work backwards from a goal. You've got immediate and urgent work to do on the ground right now, and we have immediate and urgent work to do on the ground right now, right? So think about any major technology that has the potential to do paradigm change. It's going to take time to evolve. We have to find the right place and the right time, and the right place is already now. Right time is already now. Right place is, I think, in the United States for us.
To start.
To start, because we want to show that it's a product that is incredibly superior to everything that we have on the table right now. And we'll start showing it in increments, and it's going to take a while where it becomes so stacked in benefits that it just becomes very obvious. Right now it's unconventional, but it's going to take some time to become conventional, and that's our role. And Kevin's, and his team has got to be ready for that, right? So that's the connection. So I appreciate you asking this question. And most people are thinking in quarters or years. Like the Wall Street mentality is every quarter I have to do something. And most 1-year plan, 5-year plans are those. But Silicon Valley has some areas of innovation that are looking ahead for 20, 30, 50 years. Yeah. And that's the category I would put this type of food paradigm change in.
Thank you. Fengru, I also I want to hear your reaction to what Kevin and Anu mentioned, but I also want to better understand for cultivated meat, when we think about land use for agriculture, I think a lot of times we're thinking about meat and rethinking meat consumption. Dairy doesn't come up as much in those conversations. So can you talk about kind of the imperative for dairy? And yeah, your reactions to this gap we talked about between kind of on the one hand, technology development looking decades down the road, and on the other hand, immediate needs that need to be addressed today in markets where some of this seems a little bit futuristic.
Sure. So if we look at dairy, dairy is a massive industry. It's a $700 billion industry. A lot of people don't realize, but it's actually bigger than meat, seafood, poultry, all of the other industries. So
I might have to disagree on that for one reason. It's a $2 trillion plus industry for meat, poultry, seafood globally, and it's doubling by 2050. So I don't know if we can say dairy is a bigger industry than meat, poultry, seafood. It may not be entirely true.
We need a live fact checker here. I'm not sure of the answers, to be honest.
Please get on Google and check it.
But it's a big opportunity.
It's a big opportunity. It's a big TAM. And the fact of the matter is we're all trying to solve the same problem. It's a big industry. There's lots of cows. You got to be able to milk to get this amount of dairy out. And to share some fun facts, right, for the past 20 years, the number of cow population has not increased, but milk yield has increased by 60%. And we do that by milking more from each cow and getting the cows to be bigger. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for animal cruelty. So I think when we talk about these technologies, like what we're working on here, the benefit is we're able to have a much smaller land footprint, water usage across the board, and also methane emissions, all the different emissions, and locate a lot of these factories or these processing plants to closer to where the populations are. So we reduce a lot of costs and resources required for logistics, for shipping things across the country, and we're able to have a much faster reaction time to feed the local population. So that's the other benefit of these technologies. Now, I totally agree with what both of you are saying, what we need to do now, and something that is further to the future. And I think to add to that, if we look at all the different technologies across the board, they do take a long time to mature. And I'm very thankful for our investors. I think for Uma and I, we at least for TurtleTree as well, we position our company as a biotech company. So our investors do appreciate that this is a very IP-heavy industry, and it does take time for the technologies to mature. For us, we're working on a technology called precision fermentation, as I mentioned. It is currently being used to produce things like insulin, like rennet, in the market. So it's a pretty well-established technology. So we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but there are certain pieces of IP that we're working on for the long term. And I think conversely, it can feed back to the pharma industry in terms of technology build out. So this is definitely a long-term, 10, 20-year kind of project that we're working on.
I have a question for the two of you, then I want to bring Kevin in on this. Did you want to say something quickly, though, Kevin? It looks like you had a thought. Sorry.
I'm not so sure it's so...
Take my mic.
What's happening
There we go.
today?
We hear you.
I'm not so sure it's so quick, because if you look at when you're talking about 10, 20 years type of technology, if you look at how the food system is currently organized, if we are deploying science and technology the way we are, the solutions to addressing food systems should be able to lead to two things from my perspective. It should be equitable and resilient. If those two answers are not being answered immediately, and we're looking at something that is futuristic, we need to be very careful on where this would end. We just have to look at how COVID-19, how the access to technology of the vaccines led to a bit of inequality on how countries would access it. Now, I know that's a sensitive discussion, but it's not far-fetched. So how we deploy technology within the food systems, if you're looking at the political game, I mean, food has been an uprising issue since the French Revolution, Thailand, Venezuela, Pakistan, India, Sudan. So the way I look at food and technology is not so far from how politicians are looking at it, but here is something that has the ability to address inequality and really build resilience in some of the spaces where we are operating. So I think for me, it just need to be a bit more both pragmatic, but very careful on how we are discussing or we are advancing the discussion, so that it's not more of, we'll proceed 20 years down the line and then you guys will catch up. I thought just to frame it that way.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I want Uma to react. But when you call for equitable and resilient work in this space, what does that look like? And if you could give us an example, you mentioned seeds earlier. When we're talking about food as a product, it's not just cultivated meat and reinvented dairy. Like seeds as a product, there's a ton of innovation happening in that space, happening right now, making a difference in the lives of farmers. Can you point to an example that is rolled out in a way that you see as equitable and resilient, the kind of thing you want to see more of?
So let me give you an example. If you look at any scientist that is deploying either improved seed variety, let's say for maize or rice, depending on the type of product you choose, you'd have to understand the context. For example, there are certain food products that are predominantly male-dominated, and in that country or in that specific community, if that's a kind of science or technology that you're advancing, then definitely it will be male-dominated from the onset. What you begin to do in that household is you put more resources in the hands of men, and you begin to reinforce this inequality at the household level. Remember, it's scientific. So you're looking at the food production. But one of the things that we're discussing here, you would never achieve nutrition resilience if you're not combining household income with intra-household decision-making. You would be far from it in terms of if you assume science alone is able to address inequality. It has the potential, but it also has the potential to divide. So I think even as scientists are deciding on what crops to advance or what types of food production system to advance, they need to be very context specific. And for me, resilience is not just about increased income. There's a whole conversation about if you put more money in the hands of people, it's resilient. It's not. If you look at what COVID-19 did to the food supply chain, the disruption and the dependence on specific, and even just Russia, the level of which our food systems are so interconnected. If you have one part of the nation or any part of this globe that is deploying or dependent on that technology and is controlling a lot of who has it and who doesn't have, then therein is not a resilient system. It's pretty much dependent on how the other actors do have it. So I think that's how I'd look at it. I've tried not to mention names of institutions here for the sensitivity of the conversation.
Fair.
But we can get specific later.
Yeah, I think specifics are helpful, but I want Uma to jump in. I know you had something to say, and then we might talk about some specifics.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, I agree with you on one front, and then I think I'm going to say I not necessarily disagree, but we've got to be able to move science forward, because science has always been the way that found a way to feed us. And our population is not decreasing, it's only increasing. And the reason we've been able to feed increasing amounts of people is because science has advanced.
Yeah.
We can go back and look historical, and every single major milestone came through science, industrial engineering. The part you're talking about, science has a potential to be good and bad. And it's people and politics that affects access and equitability. And we need to be very clear in saying this is a solution that needs to happen in this world. And those are the kinds of things that Fengru and I and many other companies are working on, because we have a North Star, right? And they have a compass, and saying that's where we need to get to. The path is really challenging. It's not linear. There's lots of ups and downs. Can we get to cost? Can we get to scale? Will we get regulatory approvals? Will we get stopped by incumbents because we could threaten what they could be 10 years, 20 years from now? Like, the path's not easy for science to move forward to. So we've got to figure out a solution to say, yes, this should exist in the world, but ultimately it's about the political alignment that needs to happen globally.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to ask you a quick follow-up to that, because I know that last year you received regulatory approval from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So, and a kind of a question for each of you, because we only have a few minutes here, but in terms of the roadblocks that stand in the way, one is regulatory approval, and that's a significant milestone for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and any other hurdles you see in the way, and maybe things that you hope people in this room might consider doing to support this space?
Absolutely, thank you. FDA gave approval for cultivated meat, or what they call it as no questions asked. So it means the green light for cultivated meat to exist in the real world, that they said our products grown from animal cells are similar and as safe as what is available right now for consumers are buying. That's a huge thing, because it could have taken 10 years or 25 years for that to happen. And the fact that happened last year is great for us and our team that started this industry, but it's enormous for the industry, because there's 150 companies trying to do this right now in every meat-producing, meat-consuming country, even before regulatory approval has been granted. Now that it's been granted, it allays the anxiety of so many investors, and we put a blueprint out there in the public domain in a very transparent way that can be used as a blueprint for lots of regulatory agencies in the world, so it opens the path. That's one. The second thing I'd say is, as we look ahead, there's a lot of hurdles. I'd say we're at the finish line of the first phase of our work, which is we proved science works, and we proved that there's a lot of hurdles, but we have overcome those. We're at the finish line of that. The next one, again, we're at the start line of the next phase, which is executing on the science and bringing it to consumers, making them fall in love with it, and engineering the large production facilities that can produce enough volume, and lowering cost, right? Those are the two things that we're going to look at for the next 5 years. Hopefully, that's our finish line in 5 years from now. And there's a lot I can talk about in terms of hurdles, political hurdles, and all that stuff.
Fengru, I want to bring you into this, and kind of returning to where we started. Right now, you're focused on high-income markets, both of you, but you have an eye toward global impact. So what are hurdles that stand in the way for you, especially as you look at lower-income markets, and what role can partnerships play? What can people in this room do?
Sure. I think for TurtleTree, because the ingredients that we're targeting are high value and you need a small dosage of it to get the effects, the gut benefits, the immunity benefits, I think it's really being able to find the right partnerships in each market. It could be high-value markets, it could be growing emerging markets as well, but it's finding the right partners, local partners, to go to market with. For us, we're working on a B2B2C model. So if there's anyone in the audience who have connections to any customers or any food providers, we would love to be connected to them.
Great. Kevin, I actually wonder, before we close here, if I think it's really helpful for people to have a vision in their head of what's possible. And you mentioned you have some specifics you could point to. If there's something you're seeing happening that you want to see more of, like sort of a story of what's possible, if only more work like this were to happen, what comes to mind? Maybe we can close with that.
I think the partnerships with, first of all, the partnership needs to be meaningful, not exploitative. So we have an example in Ethiopia where we are partnering with CIAT, the CGR. And one of the things they're doing, they're able to really look at the different varieties of climate-smart agricultural technologies, and they identified almost 44. They've been able to develop a kind of a playbook. I call it a playbook, but it's a menu of how farmers are able to access that information. They've gone far ahead to actually be the ones in the forefront in how do they train farmers to access and use that information. I think that's much more meaningful. They've leaned forward, they're engaging with the farmers, and farmers are able to give feedback so that they keep improving the technology in a way that is relevant to the context, respectful to the culture, but able to address the global problem we are grappling with in terms of food and nutrition security. I think NGOs by themselves will never address the issue of food and nutrition insecurity. Partnership with the private sector and as well as government institutions who need to be in the room, because there's a whole lot of governance conversation that needs to happen. All those actors need to be there. The only person that we keep missing is the smallholder farmers, because we rarely ask, is that the path you want to chart? Because at some point we assume they don't know. In most cases they do. Thank you.
Powerful way to close. Thank you. I'm now wishing we had a farmer right here on stage with us, because that would be a good conversation to have. I want to thank you all. Just, we mentioned that there is this divide, and so it's just really refreshing to have all of your perspectives here together on stage. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your time. And please join me in thanking our panelists.